Howdy folks, I hope you're all doing well and welcome back to Workshop Wednesday, and today we're going to be finishing off the KV-2 diorama. We have the KV-2 itself and the crew, we have the ammunition boxes, we have the resting Soviet infantry, and we have the German prisoners. Now all we have to do is build the base and finish the diorama. About a month and a half ago, knowing that I was going to be doing this project, I got some wood cut and shaped to the correct size to use as the base for the diorama. Unfortunately, even though it's been stored in a cool, dry place, the wood has started to warp. Now, I've kept a 20 kilo weight on top of it in order to try to counteract it, but it's still going to cause me some problems. Now, the next layer is going to be made out of extruded polystyrene. This stuff is cheap and plentiful, it's relatively easy to work with, it's very easy to work with if you have the correct tools, and there are any number of different places that you can get it. First we're going to have to cut it to the correct size. So using the wooden board, I'm just going to mark out where I need to make my cuts. There are any number of different ways that you can actually work with extruded polystyrene, although it can get quite messy if all you're using is a sharp knife. Bits tend to go everywhere, but a sharp knife will work, especially if you heat it up beforehand. Alternatively, you could get one of these. This is a hot wire cutter, although technically in this configuration it's a hot wire wand. They're not expensive. I got this one from Amazon for £25. It comes with 3 separate cutting attachments, a power adapter. It came with the pen that I used to mark out the area that I'm going to be cutting, and it also comes with spare wire. And as you can see, when it comes to working with extruded polystyrene foam, there is no better tool to have. It is literally like putting a hot knife through butter. No mess, no fuss. Well, technically you could get a hot wire cutting table, which would be a better tool to have, but getting your hands on one of those things would probably cost you 4 times as much, at least, as just one of these simple hot wire cutting tools. Which is absolutely fine, as long as you've got a relatively steady hand. In a couple of minutes you're going to get to see some of the other attachments that come with this tool. Well, there are 3 attachments that come with it, but only one of them is substantially different to what you're seeing now. The other attachment is just a longer blade for the wand, and the actual hot wire cutting tool is actually quite ingenious, and we're going to be using it to shape some of the polystyrene that's going to be going on top of the base here. First, we're going to have to get these 2 pieces of the base stuck together, and for that I'm just going to be using PVA glue. A slightly more concentrated type of PVA glue than the stuff that you may be used to, the kind of stuff that kids use for paper craft and that sort of thing. This is basically the same thing, it's just thicker and more concentrated, so it's stronger and it dries faster. And again, this stuff isn't expensive. This entire bottle cost me £5. And this stuff is not difficult to get a hold of. Any model, craft or hobby store should be able to sell it to you, and if they're all shut because of the lockdown, you can always order some from Amazon. We want to get this stuff all over the base. Got a couple of splotches where I squeezed a little bit too hard, just smooth it out. Apply the polystyrene that we cut to size earlier. Stick a weight on top to help it set, and then go away and come back after about an hour. Now I'm using the hot wire attachment for the cutting tool, and I'm using it with the waste bits of polystyrene that we cut off from the base in order to, well, get a bit more variation in the terrain. I don't want it to be just flat, although at the same time I'm not trying to do anything extreme with the terrain. I have to fit a KV-2 onto this after all. But you can see what a flexible tool this wire cutter is. It's especially good at creating beveled edges, like this for example. Check this out. Just hold it at an angle, and again you do need a relatively steady hand for this, and there you go, Bob's your mother's brother, just for a slightly more natural looking feel to the terrain. And the KV-2 should fit in there quite nicely. Going to do the same thing with the hot wire cutter to the terrain on the other side of the KV-2 to get it in camera so you can actually see it happening. see how that looks. Yeah. It's better than just having those rough 90-degree angle edges. And you could achieve all of this using completely inexpensive tools like a regular knife and maybe some sandpaper, but it would be really, really messy. There'd be bits of polystyrene everywhere that you'd be picking up for months. Now I need to get all of this polystyrene covered in something that might eventually start to look like real terrain, and for this I'm going to be using this modelling compound from Luke's APS. You can get all of this stuff from geekgaming.co.uk, and I like Luke's stuff, not least of which because it comes with instructions on how to use it, but he's also very honest about what it is that he's selling. He has his own YouTube channel where he uses this stuff to demonstrate how to build terrain, but he's quite open and honest about the fact that it's really nothing more complicated than simple tiling grout that you can buy from any hardware store. So you've got to respect the guy's honesty. And I do recommend that if you're thinking about getting into building terrain, that you do check out his channel. So how does this stuff work then? Well, according to the instructions on the back of the packet and Luke's very own instructional videos, you simply mix it up with water to a ratio of about 3 parts of compound to 1 part of water. Basically, you're looking for a consistency of really thick cottage cheese. And if you happen to have a cat with particularly long fur around her neck, do try to keep her away from the bowl while you're mixing it all up. Yes, that's right, Akazuki. You, hey, careful, watch your tail. You go look out the window and fantasize about murdering all of the birdies. Good girl. A little bit more water, maybe? Not sure. Never done this before, by the way. This is a first for me as much as for any of you watching it. So I think we're good. Now I've glued down the other bits of terrain, and now it's just a question of getting this stuff slapped on quite literally all over. Just slap it on there and pat it into place with your fingers, and you can, even at this stage, start shaping it, although it's probably better to wait for it to dry a little, and then all you really have to do is just wet your fingers and then run your fingers over the terrain, and it will smooth out. Once you're happy with the coverage, you're pretty much done, and you just have to wait for it to dry out before you even think about applying any paint. The length of time that it's going to take to dry is mostly going to depend on how thick you made the compound. The more water you added, the longer it's going to take to dry. I gave it an hour because I did make a relatively thick mix. If you weren't using this kind of modelling compound, if you were using, for example, something like sculptor mould, which tends to be used by miniature railroad hobbyists, it would be completely dry in 30 minutes or less. But sculptor mould is more expensive than modelling compound, so you get what you pay for. And as it happens, I expertly judged exactly how much I was going to need to get 100% coverage of the base. Now I just need to wait for it to dry. Came back after an hour, and it was dry enough for me to put a base coat of paint on, which I did using a spray can outside in the garden, because I'm not spraying that shit around inside a small room like this, even if I do have a window open. And now it's time to get some of that green stuff on it, because we want it to look less like the surface of Mars and more like the steppes of Russia. So PVA glue everywhere. First thing I'm going to do is start scattering some brown earth cover. Now the PVA glue will dry clear. It becomes transparent once it's dried out, and I have already painted the base in a shade of brown. But this just adds a little bit more texture as well as colour. Now you can buy this stuff, modelling flock, as the name might suggest, from modelling shops, or you can just go out into the garden, dig up some dirt, dry it out, bake it in the oven to kill any bacteria in there, and once it's dried out, grind it into fine dust. And that will also work just fine. And of course has the added benefit of being completely free. Next, I'm going to add some of this. Very, very lightly, just going to scatter it around. Again, it's just modelling flock, obviously in a much more bright green colour. And I don't know how much of this is actually going to be visible under the grass once I've applied that, but, well, it doesn't hurt. It's adding a nice little bit of colour variation, and I can't put it under the grass later once I've put the grass on, so I'll put it down now, and if it works, great, and if it doesn't, big deal. And now I'm doing the same thing again, but with yet another different colour of flock. I mean, they're all greens and browns, but they're not all the same shade of green and brown. It's all about the colour variation, breaking up that uniform colour. And it's starting to look okay. And I'm going to finish that with some heavily diluted PVA again, sprayed on just to wet it all down and make sure it gets fixed into place. Now it's time to apply the static grass, and I'm going to be doing it in a slightly more professional manner than I did on the M3 Lee diorama. I've got 3 different lengths of static grass. I actually have lots of different colours of static grass, but this is winter static grass, and it comes in 3 different lengths: 2mm, 4mm, and 6mm. So what's this static grass stuff that you're talking about, Jingles? It's ingenious stuff. Used in conjunction with a static grass applicator, one of which I have here from Wall World Scenics, you can apply grass to a diorama that actually stands up. And it does it through the cunning use of science. Inside this thing is a 9-volt battery attached to a wire which is attached to a crocodile clip. You simply touch the area of the model that you're going to cover with static grass with a crocodile clip after switching the applicator on, which runs a very small current through it, just enough to make the grass react to the static charge which you've just applied to your diorama, and the grass stands up. You may have also noticed that the fact that the wooden board at the bottom of the diorama is starting to warp is seriously affecting the stability of the overall diorama, which is a massive shame, a huge pain in the arse, and unfortunately there's absolutely nothing I can do about it. Back to the static grass applicator. With another layer of grass, this time 4mm. And I have heard from people who have reported having problems with this Wall World Scenic static grass applicator. They say that the power is on, the battery's working, the light comes on, but there's no static charge being generated. If that is the case, you've got 3 options: return it, get a replacement, buy one from somebody else, or I have heard that you can fix the problem by taking the battery out and only putting the battery in when you're about to use the applicator. I have no idea why that would fix the problem, but I've heard that it does, so there you go. Right, shall we get some actual models placed on this thing? Yeah, let's do that. The first thing that we're going to stick onto the diorama base is something that I didn't do a previous video on because I thought I'd be pushing my luck to the extreme, trying to keep everybody entertained, just making this road sign. This is a kit from MiniArt. I have no idea what the sign actually says, although apparently you can go to the MiniArt website and they'll give you translations of all of the different road signs included in the Soviet World War II road sign pack. Next, the very strong tank, the KV-2, and the KV-2 crew. Now, the 2 crew members who are already on the tank are fixed in place with superglue, and that's going to work extremely well. But I was optimistic in the extreme when I thought that I could fix the other guys in place on the terrain just using strong PVA glue. I suppose this possibly might work if I was prepared to hold this guy in place for the half an hour it might take for the glue to set, but even then it wouldn't be particularly strong and he could easily be knocked over. What I should be doing is drilling a hole into the feet of the guys who are going to be standing on the ground and pinning them with either a piece of wood like a cocktail stick or a piece of wire. But I don't have any cocktail sticks or wire, and the PVA glue is working about as well as you might expect, i.e. it's not working at all. So I'm going to have to come up with something. The PVA did kind of sort of work eventually, but it's definitely not a long-term solution. So I'm going to have a think and come up with a much better way of getting these guys to actually stand on the terrain other than just, cheating and resting them against something. And I'll have a think about that while I'm doing the resting Russian infantry. PVA glue should work for these guys because they're all either sitting or lying down. Another solution, although, not ideal, pinning them down is the ideal way to do it, but another solution that might work, in fact should work, would definitely work better than PVA, There's a type of super glue you can get that just squirts down like water, but I don't have any of that either. Still, the resting infantry are looking pretty good, but I'm going to have to come up with a slightly more permanent solution for everybody else, because the next thing that we're going to be doing is putting on the German prisoners under escort by one Russian soldier, and they are going to be standing up, and I am definitely going to need to come up with a better solution than just hoping PVA is going to work, because it really isn't. Well, I still don't have any cocktail sticks, I still don't have any wire, but I did eventually manage to find in a dark, dusty kitchen drawer a box of matches that must be at least 10 years old. So I'm using my pin vise. Why do they call it a pin vise anyway? It's definitely not a vise, and it's barely a pin. It's a hand drill. But anyway, they call it a pin vise. I'm using my pin vise to drill holes in the feet of everybody who's going to be standing on the terrain. And then I'm going to use an extremely sharp knife to whittle down the end of a match into a peg that I can fit into the foot of the standing figure and use to pin him into the ground. This should work a darn sight better than glue and hope. And what do you know? It is working. Right, just do that for everybody else and we're done. And it's all good. Well, it's not all good. I'm still a bit pissed off about the base warping. I'm having to stabilise it with a lighter there. That's seriously, there's a gap. Thanks to the wood warping that's so big I can actually get my pinky finger in. Well, there isn't any more. I've filled it all up with modelling compound, but the base is still warped, which is a real shame, but nothing I can do about that, unfortunately. It's a shame, but that's just the way it is. The finished diorama, however, with that one exception, I think is looking pretty good. A couple of things that I've never tried before, using modelling compound, for example, to build up the terrain like this. And it's not difficult to do, but it's something that I've never actually tried before. I didn't try to do anything wildly exotic with the terrain, but you know, baby steps. Learn to walk before you can run. Next time around, I want to have a stab at doing a World War II North African desert diorama, German Afrika Korps versus British 8th Army. And I'm going to get slightly more adventurous with the terrain on that one. But for now, yeah, I like. And hopefully you guys like too. Although the next thing that I'm going to be doing is not going to be the desert diorama. I'm going to be having a bit of a change of pace and doing something completely different. And just for a little teaser, next week's Workshop Wednesday video is going to be this. Creature Caster's Lady of Strife, another model kit that I've had for a while and I've been itching to get my hands on. All that coming up in next week's Workshop Wednesday video. In the meantime, I hope you've enjoyed this one, and as always, stay safe, take care, and I'll catch you next time.